Okay. My name's Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob. Just a little bit of background. My name is Reverend Bob Brach. I was ordained in 2009 through the Unity Village, and one of the first classes to get our Masters in Divinity. My wife and I, Reverend Margie Brach, I think she just stepped out for a moment. She was ordained in 2006, one of the last MEP classes that going through. We have an alternative ministry in Sacramento, California called Unity in Action, where we do guest speaking, teach SEE classes, fill in on an emergency basis. We've gotten calls as late as 10:30 on Saturday night saying, "Bob, I'm sick. Can you or Margie speak tomorrow?" Sure, where are you? We'll come speak. I also do the online Bible teacher for the Unity Urban Ministerial School. Catherine Thomas is back there. Some of my students are in the audience. Yay! Been doing that for 4 or 5 years now, and I love it. I have 47 students in 4 classes this term. So hold me in prayer in December when all those research papers, which I require, I know my first name's not Bob to a lot of people in writing papers, so but I get to read them. And you know, boy, it keeps me involved in the Bible, keeps me involved in the world. I love doing it. I also host a Unity online radio show called Unity Classic Radio Words from Our Past, where I share the unpublished talks of our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, with the world. I've been doing this for over 8 years. I started doing it when I was in ministerial school, and I did it from Charles Fillmore's office up on the 2nd floor of the education building. Whoa, talk about feeling. And his favorite affirmation up there, Jesus Christ is now here, raising me to his consciousness. Yes. For me to see it every Tuesday. I also make the PDFs available. If you like it, email me via the show. I put you on a distribution. These are great talks of Charles Fillmore, but remember, they are talks. They're not a script that you read from. They are what somebody sat in the audience, took down, note hand typed up. Cora saved them. When she passed in 55, they ended up at the archives. They were in a locked 4-drawer file cabinet. When Unity Online was starting, I was talking to Mindy Odlin about doing a show, and I was going to do Daily Word, and they said, no, they're doing that already. And I had a group of religious science people that Eric Page, who was singing in that chorus, he was the archivist. And he says, Bob, will you show the religious science people Charles' office? He meant let them look in over the rope. I took the rope down. They came in. There's like 25 people. And they look in the back and they said, radio scripts. Are these Charles radio scripts? And they're all around there. I said, no, those are from the 50s. Charles radio scripts and stuff are out in the locked 4-drawer file cabinet. Light bulb went off. And I called Mindy. He says, what if I do Charles talks? Read them dramatically. Send me a thing. So I started doing it August of 2008, and been doing it ever since, and I love it. Let's see, I also obtained a Doctor of Divinity and Doctor of Religious Studies through the Emerson Theological Institute in 2014. I got all these different degrees, but I've got a buddy here in Kansas City who keeps me very humble. He said, Bob, you have more degrees than a rectal thermometer. And you know what they do with that? So, my name is Bob with all these things. So anyway, and I also teach yoga 3 times a week at a Sacramento Yoga Center. That's how I got started at the urban school. Catherine and I were in yoga class today. We walked out and we're in the parking lot and they said, hey, Catherine, if you ever need somebody to teach Bible, let me know. Her jaw dropped. She says, Bob, my Bible teacher just quit. I went, uh-oh. So I said, sure. So I took it over and I started doing it. Well, being the after-lunch speaker, I think you have to be a little excited and presenting. And also, when Eleanor was presenting, the people were asking about Bible and keeping people awake when you teach Bible. And I think there are ways that you can incorporate what you need to keep people awake in Bible. And, using what you had in the genre in which you do, and what you're doing it. I was thinking of an example way back when, in a galaxy far, far away, And between junior and senior year of college, I decided I was going to be a Marine second lieutenant. So I volunteered for the Marine Platoon Leader Candidate Program. Hoorah, hoorah, yeah. Anyway, I signed up, and then July of the junior and senior year, they sent me to Quantico, Virginia. Buggy, muggy, Virginia. And when you come into the military, you come under a whole new set of law. Not only are you subject to regular federal law, state law, local law, you are subject to what's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And to ensure that you know about it, you have to have a lecture on what all these articles are. That's a lecture on law. Well, about Wednesday of the first week I'm there, we've been up at 0 dark 30, running around these hills, doing push-ups, all this other stuff, run us through the mess hall, feed us this high-carbo-loaded diet, push us into this Quonset hut, non-air-conditioned Quonset hut, to have this lecture. There's about 200 of us. Of course, they say, direct order, you do not fall asleep, mister. So you're sitting there, and every so often they'd yell, 10 hut, you have to stand up. And then every so often they would go, all you women Marines, 10 hut. And there's about 2 or 3 guys stand up and they, ah, ha, ha, ha. So this Marine major is giving this lecture. He's obviously a Marine lawyer. And about 2/3 of the way through, people are just struggling to stay awake. From the back of the room, we hear a basketball bounce. And it's coming up the walkway, and you want to keep your eyes on the instructor. You want to look and see, but I can't. He comes up across, comes right up in front of this Marine major, and the major says to him, Marine, what are you doing? I'm playing basketball, sir. He says, aren't you supposed to be on mess duty in the mess hall back there? Yes, sir, but I'm playing basketball. He turns and he tosses it to one of these officer candidates who's tosses it back to him. He says, look, I'm giving you a direct order. Go back to your duties in the mess hall. No, sir. This Marine Ranger reaches underneath the podium, pulls out an M14 rifle, kabam! And as this sound, this echoing thing, the Marine grabs his chest, falls on under the table. He stands and looks at the crowd and goes, gentlemen, that is an example of cruel and unusual punishment, which is prohibited under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Thank you, Marine. And he gets up and walks out. So, we can use what we had. He used this little... I'm sitting there thinking, what kind of organization did I join? Jeez. Anyway, so for the after lunch speak, I was thinking, what kind of title can I give my talk? And this is indeed spirit-led. And the thing I came up with was Fillmore and Sex. So we were having dinner last night, and I told Tom Thorpe my thing. He says, sex? Yeah, Tom, we're talking about sex in your church. Well, actually, what I'm talking about, this is the theme, main core message. Thank you, Dr. Fish. Bob, when you have a talk, what's your theme, what's your core message? Present some of Mr. Fillmore's views about interpreting the male and female roles in metaphysical work, in a metaphysical framework. And I'm looking at some of the published writings that we've used as we've gone through our classes, and this material that I've been using for the past 8 years for these radio talks, which are unpublished materials. Now, as a licensed Unity teacher, going through the process and teaching these classes, the SEE, CEP classes, when I started, I've seen some things of Mr. Fillmore, and I'm thinking, man, he's against sensuality. He's against sexuality. He's not really lifting up women. But as I've gone through these radio shows, I've seen things that are just the contrary. So, I think as we look at these themes of Mr. Fillmore's, we also need to look at the man. We need to look at some of the factors that shaped him in the times in which he was living, and also where he came from. This is our co-founder, Charles S. Fillmore. Unity trivia question. What's the S for?
Sherlock.
Sherlock! Oh, you heard it. Jeez. Yeah, it's a name that was a family name. He has no idea where it came from. He never used it, but it's Charles S. Fillmore. Born on August 22nd, 1854. Now, a show I just read a couple weeks ago, somebody wrote in and says, Mr. Fillmore, I want to do your horoscope. When were you born? He says, well, there is some confusion on that. So, he grew up in 1854 up in Minnesota, St. Cloud. They live 4 miles from town. So there's probably, the best guess is that, your Charles, that's the year you were born, and the date, or at least the date. His father was Henry Fillmore, traded with the Chippewa Indians. His mother, Mary G. Fillmore, was of Welsh descent, or Welsh and English descent, born in Nova Scotia. She was 18 when she got married. They lived 4 miles from town, St. Cloud, Minnesota. The parents separated. So Charles was a product of a single mom household being raised. Mary G. Fillmore was a tough frontier woman living 4 miles from town. He had, let me see if we got this other one there. The parents separated. His older brother, Norton, ran away. He never saw him again. Two interesting things. Well, he had no formal schooling. He was business-oriented. He had a very early spiritual experience, and he died in 48. So, Charles' first 10 years, I'm going to be getting to that left side in a minute, but there are two events that really, I think, shaped Charles Fillmore's life. One was mystical, another was physical. When Charles was 2 years of age, a band of Lakota Sioux swept down on their little cabin outside of St. Cloud, snatched Charles from his mother's arms, and took him away. About sundown, they returned and gave Charles back. Charles says I'm not sure what the metaphysics of that is, but anyhow, Charles said this, all through his life, said he had no idea what was done with him, but he believes it was some type of spiritual experience that they used him for. And it was probably great cocktail talks. And, the Indians grabbed me, took away. And the other, when he was 10 years of age, he fell, broke his right hip, actually dislocated it. But the doctors at the time thought it was something else. He developed a firm dislike for medicine. And he was roweled and twisted and leeched and all this other stuff, and it was just dislocated. So, think of this. Charles was a kid, 10 years of age. He was playing in the Indian camps. He was running through the woods. Breaks his hip. He goes from a frontier kid to an invalid. A life-changing event. And luckily, there was another woman, Mrs. Edgar Taylor, wife of an Army officer. She also had a degree like Myrtle did, whom he later married. She sees Charles as a captive audience. She wanted to teach him. So she takes him under his wing because her own son, Edgar Jr., was running around the woods. And she started teaching Charles about Lowell and Tennyson and Shakespeare. And he had to write commentaries on this and give answers. So that's why our transcendental thought shows up in Unity. He was active in business as a real estate person in Boulder, Colorado, moved to Kansas City, Missouri. Boom. And he busted too. Charles was broke several times in his career, so he knows what it was like to be poor. And also when he was here in Kansas City, he had this prophetic dream incident. Charles believed that Jackson County, Missouri was a spiritual vortex. And when you think about it, we have the two Latter-day Saints headquarters here in Jackson County. Unity's headquarters right here. The Church of the Nazarene was here. I'm not sure if they moved away. So it kind of feels a spiritual vortex. When I went through some of my degree programs, I was told that the first 10 years of our lives shape our values and mores. So I had gone through and looked at Charles Fillmore's first 10 years of his life. What were some of the events that happened near or around or connected with Charles Fillmore's life that occurred? And that's what's listed on the left side of the screen. The Kansas and Nebraska Act, it opened up new territories. The Missouri Compromise allowed settlers to come in. So the Kansas territory was created. The first bridge over the Mississippi the next year. And up in Minnesota was where this first bridge is. So our country is now, from the east to the west, connected by at least one tangible connection, opening up the west there. And I believe it's still, anybody from Minnesota here, Minneapolis? I think it's called, is it still called the Hennepin Bridge? Okay, yeah, first bridge, in 1855, connecting our country together. Before you had to cross it with a boat or something. The Battle of Osawatomie, people should know that around here. They went over and destroyed the town of Osawatomie. And who else do we know comes from Osawatomie? Cora Diedrich, who always became Cora Diedrich Fillmore, Charles' second wife. She was born in Osawatomie. The Dred Scott decision. When I read this, kind of hurt my heart. Dred Scott decision by the Supreme Court ruled that people of African American descent imported in the United States and held as slaves, or their descendants, whether or not they were slaves, were not protected by the Constitution, nor could ever be citizens of the United States. Wow, our country did that. It was, even though it was never changed in the Supreme Court, the 14th Amendment kind of did away with most of that. But here we've got this stuff happening as Charles is growing up. And, the reason I'm talking about this is we have this thing called race consciousness, right? Stuff that's happening in the world impacts us. If you don't believe it, look at the stock market. Oh, my God, oil's going up. Doesn't really go up, but their price does because people think it's going to go up. Minnesota became the second state. That's where Charles was born, up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. The first oil well. And now we're pretty much petroleum-based. And at Unity Village, when they first had it, they had functioning oil wells and gas wells. Every time they drilled for water, they struck oil. Imagine that, prosperity. And they would take and bring it up, and they would use it down at the 9th and Tracy Street to fuel the boilers. Nothing went to waste at Unity Village. The earliest sound recordings were coming out about that time. Unity, actually, if you look at the thing about Unity in the past, Vision for You, Unity had photograph records. I'm sure if Charles would have a Twitter and he'd have a Facebook and he'd have all that stuff today too, because he saw the value of radio and jumped right on it. The Civil War and Kansas being the 34th state happened. The following year, Lakota Sioux Uprising and the Internal Revenue Service. Wow. The Lakota Sioux up in Minnesota, starving for winter. The government didn't come through. The Indians are saying, hey, what's going on here? And they rebelled. If you get people pushing a corner, they're going to rebel. And they attacked the white settlers. And 303 of the Santee Indians in bogus trials were condemned to be hanged. Abraham Lincoln did away with 284 of them, and 38 Santee Indian men were hanged at one time. The largest hanging in in our history. Public execution. The IRS was formed also that way. Lincoln put it to pay off the war debt. And they started off having the first Internal Revenue Service. The term Thanksgiving Day was started in 1863. In God We Trust was added to our currency, and it didn't really become the motto of the United States until 1956. But that's where it started being put on the currency. And in 1965, Lincoln was assassinated. So all these things are happening in the world as Charles Fillmore is growing up. Some of them are directly in the area where he is. So I think that speaks to his race consciousness and where he is coming from. So what about us? Why are you telling us that, Bob? Every 10 years, there are some distinctive things that happen in our country. In the 1920s, we had the flappers, Prohibition decade, major cultural and social change, big upbringing. In the 30s, Great Depression grabs it. Boy, some of my habits about money come from my mom and my grandmother who went through that. The 40s, World War II. Wow. That impacted my family as well. I had uncles that were in the war. 1950s, no, that's where I started to come in and remember stuff. TV dinners, color television. It took a while to get to the Brach house, but that's okay. Cold War heats up. Civil rights movement getting underway. 50s, big things have changed in the civil rights. The 60s, hippies, Vietnam War. I was already in the Coast Guard at the time. 70s, disco, MASH, Watergate scandal. The 80s, changes in Russia, the perestroika, glasnost. Cold War changes and man-made disasters are coming in. Cold War hits. 2000, George Bush, Taliban, Space Shuttle, Atlantis, Saddam Hussein disposed, Exxon fraud. Big thing. iPhone, yay. We've seen that today up there. Michael Jackson dies at age 50. Wow, big impact. And I seen he was on the news last night too, I think, about something. 2010s to be developed. Global financial crisis, we're aware of that. Politics, wars, nuclear weapons, WikiLeaks, aging population, baby boomers, I'm one of them. And LBJ, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transsexual things. What about the thing in Carolina about the toilets? Man. And we talked about that, or heard about it earlier this morning, our presidential elections. Man, I'm glad it's going to be over too. It's just, I can't believe stuff is going up there. So, flashback to Charles. He's also impacted by things that were happening in the cultural period. He was in the Victorian period. Prudish, hypocritical, stuffy, and narrow-minded usually projects. Charles was a product of the Victorian age. And as transcendentalism, doing a little digging now, what does it mean for transcendentalism? Is that men and women equally have knowledge about themselves and the world about them that transcends or goes beyond what they can see, hear, taste, touch, or feel. And it comes through our own intuition and our own imagination. And people can trust themselves. I think that's what when Sherry was speaking at the last part, she's talking about looking in the mirror, telling yourself what you are, trust yourself, believe, you got big things to do. I think that's a common theme in our unity message. So, what's the point? Things change. I think the hallmark of our movement is change. Tell me about that. We just had big change in the school now. There was a thing I found that is a university in Beloit, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin in Beloit. And every year they send out a sheet to tell their instructors what the people coming in to their school that year have no knowledge about, or they're really foreign to them. And this was from the year 2010. So the freshmen coming into the Beloit College that year, they didn't know who Mork was or where he was from. And Mork is from? Mork. Okay, we all know that. They never heard, where's the beef? I'd walk a mile for a Campbell, or deplane, boss, deplane. They don't care who shot RJ, who have no idea who RJ even is. JR. Oh, JR. They were addicted with dyslexia. McDonald's never came in styrofoam containers. Oh, remember the green fish ones? Yeah. Or am I dating myself? They don't have a clue how to use a typewriter. They're too young to remember the space shuttle blowing up. AIDS was always in their life. Bottle caps have always been screw-off in plastic. Remember those? Huh? You know. Remember that one. Oh, yeah, I can do that. Oh, God, I got to go to the dentist. The CD was introduced the year they were born. They've always had an answering machine. That was a big change for me. They've always had cable, cannot fathom being without a remote control. Jay Leno has always been on The Tonight Show. You mean Johnny Carson? You never heard of Johnny? Popcorn's always been cooked in the microwave. Remember the stove and it rattle, rattle. They never took a swim and thought about Jaws. And they can't imagine what hard contacts are. Boy, I remember getting poked in the eye in a tournament. Ooh, that hurt. So I'm having the same trouble with my head. Has Eleanor had? Big rain? What? Okay. All right. So, our tools. We're talking about metaphysical Bible study. The two main tools that we have, the Metaphysical Bible and the Revealing Word. When I teach my Urban Unity Ministerial School students about the Metaphysical Bible, they have to read the introduction, the preface. In my training, the graduate training I went through, I always read the preface, the introduction about the author. I wanted to know what they're intended to do and who's telling me this. Why should I believe this person? And I always reading in the preface, the very last paragraph, and the point I want to make is in red. It says, this book is not the final field that it covers. At best, it's only a stepping stone to a higher realm of spiritual consciousness. It's not the be-all and end-all of our metaphysics. It gives you a great starting point. From Genesis to Revelation, you got a common theme here. I used to teach Metaphysical Bible in between the services at Modesto when I was a licensed teacher for about 4 years. And I had one gal who just used the regular Bible, and she did great metaphysical interpretation. So when you're looking at these definitions, remember, it's only a stepping stone. Looking at some of our male and female, where does it begin? In the Garden of Eden. The Hebrew, Gen Eden. And this was brought to my attention. It's page 81. It says, a small area somewhere in Asia where the human race first emerged from the dust of this planet. And this friend of mine called me and said, Charles Fillmore is all wet. We didn't start from Asia. Everybody knows it's Africa. And about 2 weeks ago, Margie and I are watching the Great Human Odyssey. And sure enough, they have where they lived only, our human ancestors once lived only in Africa. And they moved out of the African cradle. It's a great thing. It was on PBS called The Great Human Odyssey. You can probably get it online somewhere or whatever. But yeah, so somebody's pointing out the error. And I thought, well, what's that? Well, one of the talks that I had read from Charles Fillmore, Charles had said this back in 1922. There are a great many theories held for the changes in the geological stratifications under our feet. He's talking in Missouri. The Garden of Eden has been located in Asia, been located in Africa, and we're beginning to think it's right here in America. So, Charles was aware of it, but when it got into the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, they didn't get all that. So, don't be putting Charles down because there's one thing there. Lust of the flesh. Here we are getting some of our sex. The Revealing Word, and particularly in the 12 powers. This is where I got the idea that Charles was kind of stomping down on sexuality and sensuality. In the Revealing Word, and the definition of it, the second line says, so long as he is ruled by the serpent of sense, man is not fulfilling divine law. Wow. 12 powers, particularly under the power of life, which is located where? Generative organs, yeah, with Judas, yes. When I was in school, we had a book there. I picked out Judas. Judas really shone with me. When I first heard, I went, I'm a Catholic, former Catholic. They got a traitor represent. What is that? But you more look at Judas. He was chosen by Jesus. He went out and he did the miracles. He did the same thing. They trusted him as a treasurer. Who do you trust as a treasurer of your organization? People you can trust with your money. Yeah, but he had a falling out. And then in that section it says, you must cleanse this pure stream from its outward flow by destroying the carnal sense of sex. So, wow, what's Charles thinking about? Well, in some of his talks, a Wednesday evening healing service back in 1922, he worked on the parable of the 10 virgins. And at the end of it, he's saying, the 5-sense man is all right if you connect him up with his source. So, get the full meaning of what Charles is talking about. And he's saying, yeah, we are sensual. We are things. He had 3 sons. He married his secretary after his wife died. There's a little flap at that in Unity Village. That's why they lived on Pryor Road. So Charles, I believe, was a sensual man. Also on a Sunday morning talk entitled Jesus Christ is Here Now. That's one of his favorite themes that shows up in his talks. They had affirmations they passed out. And it's, the original affirmation, Jesus Christ is now here, restoring me to the purity of my inner life. And all the lusts of the flesh have disappeared. The Son of Man is lifted up and healed. And then he says, it isn't necessary to always put the lust of the flesh in. I think we'll use it without it, and it's good. So, Charles, change. This is back in 1922. Let me see where I'm going on this. Make sure we get enough time.
Do you think that change came after Myrtle died?
Change came when?
After Myrtle died. Do you think Charles
What? No, just in 1922. Myrtle died in 1931. So she was with her, and we got these pictures of Myrtle, the little gray-haired old lady, whatever, She was a fiery, red-headed schoolmarm. She went down to Denison, Texas, opened her own school. So she was probably a hottie, you would say. All right. She caught Charles's attention. We're all talking about bringing unity up to in modern language. Okay, Myrtle was a hottie, Laura, did you have a question?
I was just going to make a comment. Rosemary showed me a drawing once from one of the kids of Charles and Cora sitting on a sofa, and there's a window in the background, and this lady peeking through the window, and she said, that's probably my grandmother. The window at Charles and Cora.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a drawing one of the kids did once. And it was after Myrtle had died.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I understand. Let's see. The wedding was done in Lowell.
The question, because some of us didn't hear it over there, what you said.
Oh, I was making a comment that Rosemary showed me a drawing once that one of the kids did. And it was a drawing, it was a kid's drawing, and it had two people sitting on a sofa, and she said, this is probably Charles and Cora here, and there was this lady peeking in through the window, and she said, and that's probably Myrtle. And this was after Myrtle had died.
Wow! do. Well, yeah.
What were you going to say about the wedding?
The wedding. Okay, I believe it was Ernest C. Wilson who did the wedding of Cora and Charles. Okay, yeah. And I had heard it's probably the last time he says, if anyone has any reason why these two should be joined in holy matrimony, because the boys were a little upset about this. Who Rickard was? Lowe was accepting. Rickard was not. Yeah, and Rickard is the second son. So.
Actually, Ricky said to stop the wedding, and Charles turned to her and said, and I know what I'm doing. And Ricky stormed out of the house, and Cora's name had never reset in his home.
Wow. Well, that's why they ended up on Pryor Road. Yes, Tom.
Rosemary told me, and she told several classes that I taught, that every Saturday night, Cora would drive Charles over from the house on Pryor Road to Rick's home on the village grounds, and he would have dinner there, and an evening where Cora was not included.
Oh, yeah.
And then Rick would drive him home. So Cora was ostracized from the Rickard Fillmore household completely. Others were not quite so unforgiving, but let's just say that Cora was never a popular figure, and I taught development in the unity movement just this past week, and one of the questions I got was, why don't we hear more about Cora? And I realized how much emotion had shaped the course of what we included in the usual syllabus. We haven't said much about Cora. She was certainly unique, and not everybody's cup of tea. She contributed so much to organizing Mr. Fillmore's material.
And keeping him alive. You know,
Everybody wants to make a soap opera out of the relationship among the three.
But-
I don't know that there's any hard evidence. Eleanor, I think, wanted to say something a minute ago.
I was just going to make a comment
yes.
about the statement of faith. In the original statement of faith, there was a point saying that we do not abuse the sexual power.
Powers, yes.
It didn't say celibacy, but it said we do not abuse it. That was then taken out. It was one of the two things that were taken out of the statement of faith, the other one being the vegetarianism. So interpret that however you will, but he wasn't saying it's evil.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the statement of faith. You know, I don't know if anybody is aware, but Charles Fillmore in it's about, I think, 28, people are saying, what do we believe, Charles? So he decided, well, I'll write out these statements. And from 28 up to 1932, they had these statements of faith that actually appeared in the Unity magazine, very much like Science of Mind magazine shows up. And over the years, they changed. You know, the one about the vegetarianism. As long as we keep eating animals, we're going to be eating animals. We're going to be in warfare or whatever. Just a minute. So, but in 1932, you know, Charles said, no more. I'm not going to do this. I want unity to be free to grow and change. If we keep doing these articles of faith, people are going to say, here's unity. That's not unity. And Charles wanted to be able to grow, so he stopped doing that. Yes, over in the corner.
There was only two deleted from statement of faith. That was the one on sex and on vegetarianism. And his statement was not that they weren't meant, or he didn't have value. He thought they were great, but they didn't need to be part of our statement.
Statement of faith, yeah. That's, wow. All right, let's move on to more definitive man and woman. Revealing word, man, defines man as the divine idea, the epitome of being, the apex of God's creation created in his image and likeness. Woman. Feminine phase of man in Genesis typifies woman as the soul not yet developed and established in substance. Oh, yeah. Do I just... And the Greek woman. Now, I'm not sure what they're referring to for the Greek woman. Signifies intuitive perception of truth reflected into the intellect and soul. She also represents unspiritualized love that is natural to the body. Oh, my God. So we're thinking, where's Charles going with this? Also, on 12 powers. He talks about to deny away the sense of impurity with which the animal ego has clothed it. Seminal fluid, I think that's primary with the male, which flows throughout the nervous system and is connected to link between the mind and the body. So, wow, my goodness. So what's going on here? Is Charles really more male-centered and putting the female down? These talks that I'm reading, boy, stuff bubbles up that catches my eye. This is a talk given in 1923, and he's talking about women. And he says, and as we expand in our consciousness, find that the female faculties and the masculine are almost equal in the body. Well, almost equal. But anyway, Charles was believing about the equality of men and women. And later on, in 1928, he says, I find in my study even of the Bible that women are left out. Great women, great workers. So we find in politics, even the women stand equally before the law with men, and so this will occur until there's a perfect equality. There must be perfect equality. 1928, so women were coming more and more into the forefront of that. So and Charles was behind them. So I'm not sure who the editors are of the Revealing Word, but you know, things get changed and shifted as we move through our text. Also, I was thinking about one of the other major texts we have, Lessons in Truth. A lot of the centers require that to have membership. Dr. Katie wrote it. She wrote a series of articles that the Fillmores asked her to do in the magazine, then they put it in a book, and it's still one of our things. Now, Katie talks about, I remember reading this as I taught it in a class recently. Margie and I did a Lessons in Truth at one of the Unity churches in Sacramento. But Katie's saying, stop reading many books.
Yes.
Seek the light of spirit from truth within you. Go alone. Think alone. Do not be discouraged and run off to someone else to get the light. Katie's saying, it's all you. So, okay, so what does our co-founder say about it? On a talk that he gave on a Sunday morning in 1913, this is one of the earlier talks that he gave, we must know that whatever your education may be, you could have masters and doctorates and whatever, there is a teacher that will show you the right things if you would open your mind. So Charles is saying, hey, find the right teacher, find the right guru. Charles was heavily influenced by Eastern thought. If you're reading through the magazines and the archives, starting off with Thought, Modern Thought, boy, a lot of articles and advertisements for Swami Paramanasana. Say it again? I'm reading it every night, and you think I would remember it, but geez. Met him at the 1983 World's Fair. Really impressed with them. And that's when they started putting these pamphlets in Unity magazine. And in 1923, this is one that just had recently on the show, and Phil called me, Phil Pearson, and we play golf almost every other week, and he calls me and says, hey, we're angels, did you know that? Charles Fillmore, talking in this Sunday morning lesson, The Love of the Natural Man, talks about men and women. He says, men and women are angels gaining experience. That's what we're here for. And we represent those original, pure, obedient thoughts of the infinite mind. And we're endowed with freedom of expression, and realize that we are angels and demonstrate it in our lives and will be greater than the angels. Wow. So we're angels. So, in this 45-minute segment, we talked about his background, some of the life events that impacted him. The concept of change and remembering different generational views. We do that, I think, was it Sherry who said she's the Gen X? Gen X? Yeah, there's a difference. How many of you are not wearing wristwatches? I have mine on table. Because this friend of mine, where I do volunteer work for California Fish and Wildlife, and he's about my age too, and he says, all the younger kids around here don't wear wristwatches anymore. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, watch these little science aids when they come through. Because they have the smartphone, Yep. So, and I went, I got to have my wristwatch before I go out, get it set to the right time, right on the chronometer and whatever. Huh? Military man, yeah. For years I used to do the 24-hour thing, and I'd say, meet me at 1400, and I go, what? No. 2 o'clock, just meet me at 2 o'clock, it'll be fine. So, points of interest, possible wording in some of these texts, don't get upset about it. It's different people, the lust of the flesh thing we talked about, views of men and women discrepancy, and a Katie and Fillmore discrepancy. So, anyhow, packed a lot into 45 minutes. So, questions and answers. What do you want to chat about? Sex. Where's more juicy stuff, Bob? Yes, Tom.
Well, I want to say, Bob, that you have really packed a lot into a short period of time, but not in a way that it's like a barrage of information. You've given us a train of thought to follow, and I find that very, very stimulating. So often we hear different views of sexuality expressed as part of unity, and too often folks aren't really eager to see what Mr. Fillmore actually wrote, recognizing that even if he wrote it, it is not cast in stone, and we're not sinners if we don't follow it. Tonight I'm next to the last, but I'm going to include some information on this topic also.
All right.
It's complex. It's complex. And one of the things that there's a tendency, even in unity, to do is to begin to take, by some people, to take the Founder's thought as catechism, whereas others say we need to take the Founder's thought and throw it out. Poles, there is a great deal of room for discussion of the Founder. As you showed right there, Fillmore considered his work to be a stepping stone.
Yes.
Our work is a stepping stone. If we believe that evolution and revelation are open at the top, then everything will always be a stepping stone. So this is really great stuff. It's an amazing day.
Yeah, I like, last night I dreamt some of this. One of my buddies, who was my operations officer when I was in the Coast Guard, gave a presentation, and I'm listening to Husky Tommy, and he was talking about Fillmore and stuff, and some other guy came up, and I go, wow. And then it came to me as I'm laying there about 5:45 about, well, we've got all these great texts that we like and study. And we say, well, their language is a little outdated. And I'm thinking, well, what about if we look at it comparable to the Bible? We don't have the original documents of the Bible. We have copies of copies of copies of copies. And they were written in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. And as they get translated, the lens in which you look through makes a difference on how you translate those words. When Tom Shepard, when I graduated, I'm hanging around here because Margie was working at the association. He said, why don't you go take some Greek or Hebrew over at St. Paul? So I called St. Paul and I said, no, I think everybody's going over to the Nazarene. So I took a year of Greek, a year of Hebrew, a semester of Aramaic. I audited it for $25. And they loved it. They loved having a unity minister sit in their classes. In fact, I took a biblical geography, biblical archaeology, and this one professor called me up at home. He said, Bob, my mom is sick. I have to drive over to Indiana. Would you teach the class on Monday? I went, me? He says, yeah. He says, you do it. So I came in. It was like the second day of the term, or second class term, and so we talked about it, and all of a sudden, the conversation comes on homosexuality in the Nazarene seminary. Yeah. I'm not sure. So I said, hey, let's talk about it. So I said, I'm a unity minister. Some of my classmates are gay men and lesbian women. And I said, you're going to have people showing up in your congregation that may not admit it, but they are. And this one little gal says, if the founders would ever know what we're talking about, they'd turn over in their graves, Mom. So anyway, and when I got home, I called a professor. I said, Professor, be aware. The principal made me calling you about that unity minister. So, but it got him talking about it. Yes, Kay.
One of the things that captured my attention to what you were saying earlier, Bob, is when people would call Charles and say, what do we think? What do we believe? I think that's very dangerous. I think that maybe, even now, you hear people say, well, in unity, we don't believe this, and we don't. But I'm in unity, and I believe that.
Yeah.
I think the speakers earlier were talking about going into the silence. Go into the silence and figure out what you believe.
Yeah. What does it mean? Charles, that's a famous answer. And people say to Mr. Fillmore, what do you mean by that? He says, well, what do you believe? And the famous line, Dorothy told me this. She was in a class and said, somebody said, Mr. Fillmore, and he read to him, he said something that he read. And he said, well, where'd you get it? He said, well, right from your book here. He said, I don't believe that anymore. And May Rowland, make a note. Next publication, we take that thing out. Yes.
Thank you for your expressing your background and for standing for what you're standing for. But my question is, what do you think about the dedication and covenanting that Fillmore and his wife practice? Do you practice it? Do you recommend it, or do you practice it?
Well, what do you think about that, Julian? What do you?
Well, I think it's very good, but I don't want to revert to my child.
Okay, I'll stand in your shadow. Okay.
But I practice it because I believe it is. It gives me. It focuses my energy and gives me a purpose in life. I just need to consecrate myself to the will and work of Jesus Christ. I understand that I'm continually blessed with the abundance of all good, and it comes to me with ease and grace.
Yeah.
That just encapsulates for me whatever.
Yeah, you know, the stuff that, you know, I try to avoid getting into literalism. I was in a fundamentalist church for 10 years, and I knew about the Bible, man. I knew what it meant, and that was a literal word. So now I kind of stepped away from that, so I can look at it metaphysically. You know, and the thing of Mr. Fillmore, the one quote is that when I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm, and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that are to be done by me. I love it. You know, towards the beginning of this year, I thought I was getting the unity stigmata. My voice was kind of cracking. My right hip was really aching with arthritis, and I was getting this. I said, "What's going on, Charles? Am I manifesting your body?" Well, 2 months ago, I had a complete right hip replacement. So yes, I can climb up and down, do all this other stuff, but I have to be careful. So anyway, but you know, I think it's important that we pick and choose what do we really believe, and what speaks to our heart. Sherry talked about that, and what is speaking to your heart? If it doesn't, let it go, you know. Let it go like there's sand in the clouds going through there. Eleanor, you had something?
I just wanted to make a comment about covenant, because covenants have been throughout the Bible. And what we do when we make a covenant is we make a commitment to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think twice before you commit to something.
I know.
Because a violation of your covenant is creating a conflict within yourself.
Yep.
So that I think there is a value in a covenant. I'm going to commit to this. And then each day I'm going to read scripture or whatever it is that you decide to do. And then you're more likely to honor that.
Yes. And the one caution, I had a philosophy of a little good is lots better. You know, got me in trouble in my earlier years. And if two drops is better, 4 must be. And I'll start adding on stuff. I'll commit to stuff, and I'll go do this and that. Next thing I know, oh my God, that's a big thing to do. So, you know, be simple in what you take. I used to have like 13 devotionals I'd read in the morning. I'm down to like 4, which is good. So, breakfast is done, and I said, almost noontime, I got to get going. It's also 5 minutes to 2. So we need to have time to stretch your legs. The next speaker can get up here so we can keep on time and trucking on out. Namaste, folks. I'll be with you the rest of the day.